Hello everyone, and welcome to Third Spacing the podcast, where we explore important issues in the peripheries of clinical medicine in Singapore. I am your editor, Hosan. In this episode, we talk to Associate Professor Sophia Archuleta, the head of the Division of Infectious Diseases in NUH and President of the NUHS Women in Science and Healthcare, or WISH, initiative. She shares her experience of being a woman in healthcare, the need for advocacy to come from both women and men, and for more female representation in healthcare leadership, as well as how we can start rethinking gender norms in healthcare.
As a woman, how was it like growing up, moving on to study medicine, and then working as a medical professional in the United States? Were there any significant challenges you faced personally?
Personally, I didn't consider my gender and its, impact on a medical career until later in life. So as a college or university student in medical school, even early days of residency fellowship, I didn't see myself or anything about how I went about my professional life as any different than my male colleagues. For me personally, it was really as you kind of advance the academic ladder or professional ladder, so to speak, that you realize that the field thins and you go into meetings and you go about your work and see fewer and fewer women, or the ratio of men be higher in relation to women than it was earlier on. I'm not alone in this. Pretty much here in Singapore and in most of other parts of the world, this is a phenomenon that's seen. And I tend to think you'd have to be blind not to realize it when you're in those situations. And ultimately, once you notice it, you kind of feel that something needs to be done about it. That things really have to improve for the generation that comes after you. The only example I can recollect from that was kind of blatant, I guess, that I can recollect from my medical school days was waiting for the bus to go back from Manhattan to the Bronx, which is where my medical school was, and an older woman at the bus stop asking me, "Oh, you go to Albert Einstein? Are you studying there to be a nurse?" That was one. And B, are you hoping to meet a nice doctor and get married? It's like, no, I'm going to be the nice doctor. I laughed at that and didn't take it seriously.
With regards to the treatment of women in medicine, was there any difference between Singapore and the United States?
I think in both places there are some perhaps unique issues that women tend to disproportionately face compared to their male colleagues. Of course, society, culture can play an impact as well, but both in Asia and in the Western world, there are issues with gender gap, especially when you get to leadership positions or advanced positions along the academic and professional ladder in medicine, which I think are quite similar across settings, no matter what. Perhaps in terms of awareness, Singapore is a little bit later in terms of the game, but I have a feeling we might get ahead faster, even though starting a little bit later. In some places like the US, the UK, the realization or recognition has been there for decades, but actually the results are not fantastic. They're still dealing with only a minority of women at full professor positions, a minority of women at dean, chief medical officer, and other type of leadership positions in healthcare. So it's not fantastic. I think it tells us that awareness is not enough and that you need system solutions. And I hope that Singapore will do better as far as those are concerned than a lot of other places have.
Was the representation of women in the fields of science and medicine something that you have always felt for?
So I suppose it was something that I primarily became interested in working towards later on in my professional life. As I mentioned, kind of in the early days, you're kind of focused on getting through med school, getting through residency, hitting all the right landmarks as you progress and you go through. And I always felt very lucky and happy in my chosen field, happy with my colleagues, had very supportive mentors throughout, both men and women. And maybe because I felt anyway that I was doing well and I was was achieving certain promotions and leadership positions, ultimately, like I said, it does become noticeable that you are in a room that has more men than women. And sometimes you might be the only woman, or you might be in a room with men whom you outrank, and that people who don't know you actually assume that one of them is the boss, and you're not. So things or episodes like that can accrue as you progress. And I guess it was that collective experience for myself. And then when I discussed it with colleagues, friends at work, we know that there's a shared experience in this. And we felt that we could do better, and ultimately formed WISH, the NUHS Women in Science and Healthcare, to raise awareness about these issues.
Is there any woman out there who has inspired you the most in your life, and why?
I think like a lot of people out there, both men and women, my inspiration came from my mother. She passed away recently, but she was a physician, obviously a working mother, and a person of tremendous courage and forthrightness. And I think through her example and the way that she juggled her work life, her personal life, and did it with style and strength was my inspiration throughout, I would say. Professionally, there have been many people, both men and women, from whom I've learned more things than I can count. And I owe them a lot. And when you put all those role models together, I think is what makes you want to do the same thing for others. Both, I think, for as medical teachers, obviously, I'm speaking to a medical student audience, but also through things like WISH, which ultimately will, we hope, improve things for current generation, but also for women and men who come after us and our organization and our healthcare environment as a whole.
You are the president of NUHS WISH, also known as Women in Science and Healthcare. Could you share more about this group and how it was started? And was there any discouragement in doing so?
So WISH was formed 2 years ago with a group of like-minded individuals with our shared experiences, as already mentioned, and looking to create awareness about gender equity issues, and looking for evidence-based solutions that we could then implement going forward. We have been working in partnership with NUHS as an organization and the School of Medicine, the Dean's Office, in order to both raise awareness, put in place initiatives like the Lunch and Learn series, the WISH webinars that were concluded in November, just recently, and putting together leadership workshops, mentoring workshops in order to specifically address some of the gaps or barriers that are disproportionately affecting women in the institution. The idea is to celebrate women's achievements, empower women to their fullest potential in the healthcare workforce, and ultimately to improve healthcare as a whole. Diversity is, of course, good, and losing our talent is of no benefit to any of us. So retaining women in the workforce, promoting them or empowering them to be promoted to leadership positions ultimately would be of benefit to all of us. Oh, no discouragement. I believe that we're in a time that Singapore as a whole is looking at these issues. Just recently, the announcement of the white paper that's going to be worked on for next year, looking at gender issues on a national level, I think gives an idea of how timely this all is. And again, within NUHS and the School of Medicine, there's been nothing but support for the initiative and a recognition that it's time that we do better as far as women advancing in the medical careers is concerned.
As we all are aware, He for She is a global effort that seeks to involve men and boys in achieving equality by taking action against negative gender stereotypes and behaviors. We do understand that men need to be a part of achieving equality as well. Hence, what do you think of our male colleagues being part of this group as well? How would that be different?
Absolutely. Men are welcome. We do have men attending our events. We have men members of our WISH Executive Council as well. We can't do this without an inclusive approach. He for she champions both on a personal level, so a spouse supporting a spouse, a male colleague supporting a female colleague, both at the individual level, but also at institutional levels when you have he for she champions, for example, department chairs or a leadership figure who is male and who vocally supports initiatives like WISH or female colleagues, sponsors them, is absolutely instrumental in making a difference. In fact, in case it's not clear, NUHS WISH is open to all men, women, anyone who currently works or is a student in any of the NUHS institutions, including you, our medical students, are welcome to join any of the WISH events or reach out to us.
According to a Straits Times article, research conducted by jobs website Glassdoor found out that women are still earning 13% less than their male counterparts. Among high-paying jobs, the MOM found that the largest pay gap was in the specialist medical practitioners, with women specialists making only about 49.7% of their male colleagues' median wage. Why is there such a big income gap still, despite having equal access to education here in Singapore? And are there any measures that have been taken to lessen this gap?
I may be wrong, but every single study I have ever read has in fact found, if you look, you will find a gender pay gap. So I guess I was not very surprised to see this study showing that in fact there is a gender gap in our local context. So not that surprising as far as from where I stand, essentially. It's a little bit above my pay grade to comment on specifics, but I do look forward on the white paper next year, offering some suggestions and solutions. That being said, some of the usual things causing a gender gap tend to be, and may specifically relate to healthcare, is that women tend to exit the workforce to higher numbers than men and lose income potential. Even if they re-enter the workforce years later, they have taken a penalty for the time out that they took. So say for maternity, childcare, they took time out for other reasons, to take care of an elderly parent, for example. And that's not to say that men don't do that. Some in fact do, and hopefully more will in the future if needed. It's just that disproportionately it tends to be women that take these time outs professionally as compared to men. Specialty choice also can make a difference. So some fields that potentially have higher income earning potential tend to be maybe dominated by men as opposed to women for different reasons. Also because we have a leadership gap. So if a woman doesn't reach the highest academic ranks or leadership positions within an institution, then there might be associated loss of income there as well. So when you put all that together, there would be a pay gap. Part-time work has also been thought of as an example. I'd be very interested to see more information about this in Singapore. In other countries where some of these studies were done, doing part-time work, when you compare the actual amount of money for the amount of work that you do, it still doesn't account for the gender pay gap. Some individual factors as well. Women tend to negotiate less aggressively than men with their human resources departments, for example, or negotiate for pay raises from their bosses. Negotiating skills or pushiness tend to be looked at negatively for women as opposed to for men, which can be seen as just, he's assertive. It's okay if he negotiates. So there's positive associations for men, whereas for women it can be seen negatively. So those are just some of the reasons.
At the NUHS, 2019 figures show that women hold 21.2% of senior leadership posts. Why is there still a lack of gender parity in leadership roles within the healthcare sector specifically?
So a few different reasons here as well. So when we think about career progression, you can think of it as a pipeline, and the leaky pipeline model is a model that has been used to look at gender parity in different fields, including medicine. So one issue, of course, is entry into the pipeline. So in Singapore, as hopefully our medical students know, we've had a gender quota. We used to have a gender quota until the early 2000s that basically set a maximum number of 30% of medical students essentially were women. So up until very recently, only really a generation of physicians ago, the max number you could possibly have anywhere in the pipeline, all things being equal, for medical leadership type positions would have been 30%. So if everything along our pipeline is equal, we should have been 30% at entry, 30% in the mid-career or stages or academic ranks, and 30% at leadership. So of course now we've increased entry into the pipeline. So the medical school achieved gender parity, and that's a fantastic, fantastic outcome that of course we're all still celebrating and should continue to celebrate. But now increasingly we want to look at what happens at the later stages of the pipeline. So not just how people enter medical school and graduate medical school, but basically how do we retain them in healthcare and in academic medicine, specifically at the middle and leading end of the pipeline. So what happens in a woman's career or in a woman's life after medical school, essentially. So childcare, of course, maternity leave, child rearing, all those are very important. So if women have to take time out, how do we encourage them to come back in, and how do we make it easy for them to come back in, not penalize them or have a culture where that's not encouraged or is not facilitated, is a really big deal about in maintaining the women's progression along the pipeline. In terms of the leadership end, having appropriate role models, I think is a key issue right now because we have such a majority of men holding the leadership positions. It can be tricky for women to see themselves in those roles, right? We have see one, do one, teach one. Well, if you can't see one, you can't see a female CEO, you may not be able to envision yourself as being the CEO, 10 years later. So the lack of role models is important. And then, of course, throughout the pipeline, there's an issue of unconscious bias or implicit bias, as it's called, that tends to insinuate itself in a lot of the decision making without people even realizing. So academic promotions or promotion committees, even things like offering, conference opportunities or award opportunities to people that would advance their careers can go disproportionately to men, and women tend to be sidelined because of implicit bias.
With this significant income gap and lack of women in leadership positions, what impact does this cause on both the personal and societal level?
So on a personal level, it absolutely discourages women from taking on those positions in future. If you see that people who look like you or of the same gender as you may not be recognized or valued in your organization, it might increase the risk of you wanting to leave that field. From a societal level, again, I think diversity is so important, especially in healthcare. There's a lot of evidence out there that diverse teams make better decisions. Organizations with diversity are smarter, more nimble, and ultimately it improves the environment in the organization for everybody who works there. There's even data recently in studies that shows having a woman physician is associated with better health outcomes in things like post-myocardial infarction or taking care of complex patients. And of course, that is something that is unlikely to be linked to the extra X chromosome. But, is there something perhaps in the approach of women towards certain of these patients that could be looked at? Is it their communication skills? Is it something about empathy, as you guys discussed in a previous podcast, that can be learned and can then be a skill that's shared by male and female physicians alike?
How do we start involvement of our male colleagues from medical school itself?
At a symposium last how long ago? Last year at the Asia Pacific Medical Education Conference, or APMEC, I presented a symposium with colleagues on gender equity in academic medicine. And in the audience were 3 Japanese medical students. And I asked them, actually, we asked everybody why they joined the symposium, why are you here, that kind of thing. And they shared that they were there because they wanted to know what their female colleagues were going through. And I thought it was a tremendous answer. I applaud them. I think we need more he for she champions across all stages, specifically for medical students. I think for the guys, just ask your female classmates what it's like for them and just talk about the differences that they might be experiencing. So yes, maybe some of them are, patients look at them and don't think they're medical students, or disproportionately don't think they're medical students, or they might get some more offhand comments from patients than you are. Certain things that we call, look up the term microaggression and see what that means. We tend to be addressed by our first names and our titles not used many times as compared to male colleagues. And that does begin in medical school. And it'd be great if everybody looked into that and talked about it more.
In a speech by Minister Indrani Raja at a WISH webinar, she mentions how we should rethink norms at home, work, and society to enable the advancement of careers for women. How do you think we should rethink norms at work, specifically in the field of healthcare, and who plays a part in this?
Thanks for that question. And of course, we're very thankful for Minister Indrani being able to join us for the WISH webinar. I interpret that, and how I think about it is that it's about the role of the person, not the gender of the person. So if the role, for example, is that of caregiver, how do we put systems in place that facilitate the role, regardless of whether it's filled by a man or a woman? So how do we allow flex time, for example? How do we encourage that person to maintain their skills, even if they have to take a time out to assume the role of caregiver? How do we put measures in place that allow them to then come back to the workforce and contribute at the highest level they can, regardless of if it's a man or a woman? If we're in a society where disproportionately certain roles fall to women, but even if they fall to men, the measures that we then put in place will benefit anyone who fulfills that role. And ultimately will advance women in the field because, as I said, there are certain roles that do disproportionately affect women more than men.
What is gender equality versus gender equity and versus woman empowerment to you?
So we often talk about being gender blind. Increasingly, we're trying very hard to move away from that. And certainly within WISH and the Equal Opportunities for Career Development Office under Academic Affairs, being gender blind basically tells you or encourages you to not think about a person's gender or other issues where there might be some individual differences among people. Being gender aware actually encourages you to recognize that there may be certain issues, certain systemic barriers that might impact a person's advancement over another person. In this case, since we're speaking particularly about gender, being gender aware encourages you to look at those systemic issues. So perhaps childcare policies, family-friendly hours, looking at equal opportunities to offer both men and women in your workplace. Those would be examples of being gender aware. Looking at the presence of unconscious or implicit bias in your organization and offering education or awareness workshops around that in order to ameliorate those issues. That's being gender aware, not being gender blind.
Sylvia Earle, an oceanographer, mentions that the change is not just how women are regarded by men, but how women regard themselves. Do you feel that women innately feel that they are ultimately judged based on their gender and not on their capabilities?
Sometimes people talk about a change in lingo in the gender equity space. We want to move away from approaches that are about fixing the women and implies there's something wrong with the women, and move into approaches on how do we change the system. ultimately, there certainly needs to be a balance between things that an organization can do, and there are certainly some tools that we can give women to empower themselves as well. So with WISH and EOCD, what we're trying to do is use a combination of approaches. So things like lunch and learn initiatives are, of course, important in terms of raising awareness among both our male and female colleagues, which is very important, generating some key data or some key theories that we can potentially use to generate change, including a culture change in the organization. So the more, if we have a critical mass of people that are even just discussing these issues, it doesn't mean that you will necessarily find the absolute right answer for a problem, but just the fact that we're discussing issues that may have to do with gender, I think gives a very strong message to women in a specific organization that the problems that they're facing or what they have to say are valued and are important to the organization, right? Because we certainly as physicians, but also other members of the faculty and the staff at NUHS, we love what we do. We spend a lot of time doing it, and we want to do it in an organization that values us as much as we value the work that we do at the organization. So I think both as individuals, we want to improve where we are, and then the system as a whole needs to commit into making change as well. So I think they go hand in hand.
Could you give us some examples of your WISH initiative?
So we talked about the lunch and learn sessions that focus around awareness, networking, and role models for women, and also for he for she champions. Some other examples would be structured courses on leadership that we're currently running, unconscious bias seminar training that we're looking at for in order to again raise awareness and some tools to combat unconscious bias. With the EOCD office had a grant call for proposals specifically examining gender issues in the workplace, and that had some great uptake. We look forward to seeing what some of the results from those projects might be. And very importantly, the School of Medicine's gender equity policy, which was announced at the WISH webinar. We were very excited to be part of that and look forward to its dissemination.
We'd also like to know who attends these lunch and learn sessions, and if they are attended primarily by women, have you ever doubted the impact that you're making in terms of raising awareness about gender equality in workspaces, such as in the healthcare field?
It's certainly a case of the more the merrier. We'd like more women to attend, and we'd like more men to attend. As I said earlier, the only prerequisite is to have an interest in this and to want to find out more, and you're welcome to attend. The Lunch and Learn series right now is on hold because of the COVID precautions as a physical event, but we're looking forward to continuing as webinars. And we will be having our first International Women's Day event, which is always on March 8th of every year. So stay tuned if you would like to attend that. Last year, we had it planned, and unfortunately, we had to sacrifice it to COVID-19. So obviously gender equity is a big issue, both locally and internationally. I feel passionately about it. Everybody who's in WISH feels passionately about it. And it's something that only with collective efforts can we resolve at some point in the future. And I look forward to meeting many, many people over the years who are going to have an interest in this and looking to a better future.